Yeah, so today what I want to be covering is a little bit about who I am, kind of what I do, and what it's like to be a sound designer in the game industry. I'll be talking about some tips for how to get started in game audio, as well as what kind of opportunities there are out there, because a lot of people kind of have the conception or the perception that there's pretty much only sound design and composing as jobs, but in fact, there's a lot of different paths that you can go down. And then lastly, we'll dive into questions. So yeah, just feel free to write down some stuff and then yeah, shoot that in the chat, and I'll answer to the best of my abilities. So, who am I? I am Greg. I am based in Guildford, which is actually a really cool games hub. There's tons of awesome companies here. I work at Soundcuts myself, which is an outsourcing company. We do sound for games, films, mobile, VR, all kinds of stuff, but I'm all in the games sector. So I've been working on that for the past 3 years full time, and a little bit before that with um, contracting and stuff like that. I've worked on things like The Quarry with Supermassive Games, as well as Dusk Falls with Interior Night, both of which are kind of more interactive stories. And I'm working on an unannounced project at the moment, which unfortunately I can't talk about as per usual in this industry. But yeah, additionally, some smaller mobile and VR titles. I do some education things in my free time because I'm super passionate about that, including the Game Audio Learning Portal, which I'll talk a little bit about later. And it's a nice resource to help people who are trying to get into the industry to kind of figure out where do you start, how do I approach this whole thing, because there's a bunch to learn and it can feel super daunting. I also have a YouTube channel where I upload some videos on sound design stuff, as well as like general advice, and we do real reviews on there, which are live, so you can interact, and yeah, those are super fun. They're also helpful to watch if you're not necessarily showing off your reel yourself, because you can always learn kind of from what other people are doing and kind of that feedback that they're getting. And feedback is always subjective as well, so it's always fun to look at that and think, okay, what would I do differently? What feedback would I give? And it's also really useful for people then to give their feedback, because it allows a bit more of analytical listening and thinking and all of that. Additionally to that, we have me and Lewis have made a little social media platform called Airwiggles, which is a really fun community for people who are into game audio, and we share a bunch of tips and tricks on there, as well as it's just a really nice place to get feedback on as well. People post a lot of their reels on there, and yeah, and we have some fun activities as well, so I definitely encourage you to check that out, but I'll be doing a little show off later as well. So, what does a typical day or week look like for me? The answer to that is really it depends. It depends on things like the project. So, what type of game am I working on? What genre is it? And a first-person shooter will be very different from something like a MOBA or City Builder or something, as well as how small or large is the project, because some projects will take a week and others will take 3, 5, 6 to 8 years, like a GTA or something like that. So it really depends. It also depends on the role and the specialty area that you're assigned to. So if you're on a bigger project, generally, so the rule of thumb is the bigger the project, the more niche your kind of specialty will be. What that means is that when you're kind of working in an indie game studio where there's less people, it's a smaller team, you're going to wear a lot more hats, because if you're the only sound designer and maybe even composer, then you have to probably not only make the sounds, but also implement them and also make the music and design the systems and all of these things. Versus if you're working on Red Dead Redemption, like a huge game, then you might just be working on doing Foley for all of the characters, or there might be a person doing Foley just for the animals and stuff like that. So it really then kind of gets a lot more niche because there's so much content that you have to take care of. There's a couple of general categories that we split audio into, and these are Foley, sound effects, ambience, music, and kind of cinematics and stuff like that. So Foley is really like all the movement sounds, like footsteps and cloth and kind of picking up something like a glass and then throwing it and shattering it. Sound effects will be things like explosions and stuff like that. A car driving, if you're driving the car in a racing game. Ambiences, of course, are things like wind and wood creaking that you're walking next to, if it's like a wood shutter or something. Music is very obvious, and cinematics are things that kind of enhance the music and are more in the tonal area. And yeah, you can find them a lot in trailers when you have that typical like bram, stuff like that. So the next thing it depends on is what kind of development cycle you're currently in. So it's roughly split into 3 parts usually, being pre-production, production, and post-production, with pre-production being very much a planning phase where we figure out what kind of direction we want to go into with this game, what are the systems, how can we kind of make everything as smooth as possible for then when we're in development. So kind of developing all the frameworks and all of that stuff. And it's very much a lot of experimentation and planning and yeah, creating a demo, stuff like that. And production is where the game really, really gets made. So all the systems, everything should hopefully be in place, and then all the content gets made. And then post-production is kind of like lots and lots of bug fixing and play testing and iteration and things like that. Of course, these things happen during the process as well. So these lines are always a little bit blurred, but that's kind of a general way to splice that up. Additionally, so we then look at the milestone deliverables because games, of course, need to be planned as well. So we have wonderful production teams who help with that. And so we look at what are the goals for kind of these next 2 weeks. If we're working in sprints and if we're working in milestones, then we usually look at what are the goals for this month and things like that. And then we break that down into further tasks that we can work on. And yeah, and we figure out what's the most important thing and prioritize that and break it down into smaller tasks. And those tasks, for me personally, as a sound designer, look something like this. So there might be days where I am creating assets, and that means assets means any kind of like sound that gets into the game. So these would be split into different tasks, which include recording, editing, processing, and then designing. So recording is, of course, very straightforward. Pick up the mic, point it at stuff, and record. Of course, that becomes a lot trickier if you're trying to record things like guns and you have to book a session with someone at a gun range. And in the UK, that's even harder than in America, for example. So then that gets into the territory of trying to manage and plan that call. What kind of equipment do we need? What kind of microphones do we need? What's the weather like? All of that stuff. So it can get very complicated very quickly. Editing is very much like when you're in the DAW and you cut up stuff, make sure that it's all clean, that we name stuff correctly, all of that. And yeah, processing is using plugins to, of course, clean stuff up, make things sound cool, etc. And designing is then putting it all together. Implementing assets is the next kind of big bucket of things, which is when we take the sounds and then we put them into the game. And that consists of really designing the different systems, trying to implement them into our middleware. And the middleware is basically something where we it sits in the middle between the game engine and kind of the DAW, so to speak. And so we kind of take the sounds and put them in there, and it lets us add things like variation in pitch. We can create systems within that. to make the soundscape very, very interactive. Then we have to integrate that into the game, either with our technical sound designers or with the help of programmers. And then, of course, there's lots of playtesting and bug fixing. And playtesting is a huge part of being a game developer in general. Every discipline really has to make sure that the stuff translates well, because you can make the best sounds, but then if they sound like crap in the game, then it's no good. So you have to go back to the drawing board. And bugs, of course. Bugs are a very interesting kettle of fish, or whatever the analogy is here, as they can come in all forms and sizes. And sometimes you get a bug which takes weeks to solve and no one knows what's going on, or it's some stuff that's super simple. There's also communication with the team, which includes kind of giving feedback, which is super important, as you want your work to be as good as it can be, as well as planning and collaborating with people. And then there's documentation, which is really creating like asset lists, which means like what kind of stuff are we making in the first place? How can we implement that then into the game? Where live these assets in their current process? So have these impacts been recorded yet? Yes, they have. Okay, do they need to go into the game? Stuff like that. So we need to track these kinds of things to stay organized. And then, of course, planning for sprints and milestones with the production team and stuff like that. And then we also want to document our systems, how things work. So, yeah, basically, if you want to get started into the industry, if that sounds interesting to you, there's the first step is to really like play games and listen and just kind of do things in the game and see how it reacts. And I think that is something that is really, really underappreciated. We focus a lot on the creation of sounds and all of that, but I think playing and listening is really, really underrated. So if you're wanting to get into this, then I think just playing and listening to stuff, figuring out what kind of things you like, what you don't like, is super important. Also just like experimenting and figuring out what you want to do. So what I mean with that is there's a bunch of different disciplines which within game audio, which I'll come to on a later slide, and they all have slightly different tasks. So it's really, really useful to kind of figure out what direction you want to be going into. And the key to that is really follow the fun. So it's by following the fun, you'll really ensure that you actually enjoy your job. And most of the time, of course, a job is still a job. Sometimes I do things that I don't enjoy so much, but in general, kind of it's really good to follow what you enjoy doing. So if that is something where you know, oh, I really enjoy recording stuff, then you might want to look more into going into field recording and all of that, and sound design. And if you enjoy doing very technical things, then maybe audio programming or technical sound design is for you. And that way we can make sure that we really pair our interests with these disciplines, and we can do really good at them because we're really motivated to do that. And yeah, that really goes over just trying it out and figuring out like, yeah, this is fun and this isn't fun. And you do that by just doing stuff. And then start making sounds. So if you're, of course, into sound design and all of that, then just get open your DAW. If you're not sure which one to pick, I can recommend Reaper, but that's all in the learning roadmap. And yeah, it's just great to start making sounds. So I'll quickly go into the learning roadmap. Essentially, this is the game audio learning portal. So I made this a while ago, and if you watch this intro video, it kind of gives you a little bit of an overview. But essentially, if you want to get into game audio, then the learning roadmap is really, really useful because it can give you a really nice breakdown if you're not sure where to start. And so these are all kind of different tabs with all kinds of different content, and you can sort these topics by these filters as well as the job role. So if you're looking to go into audio programming, then these topics will be very useful to you. If you're not sure, honestly, the best thing to do is just leave this as it is and just start from the top and then kind of like skip the things you already know. But it's really kind of split up in a way where you start from the very beginning of like how sound works and how we perceive it, and you can go down and read this. There's a summary of each of these topics, and then there's further reading links, which I really, really recommend to go through, as they have different videos and articles from really, really good sources. And then there's also further reading for a lot of the sections. So if you're really into this topic and you want to nerd out a little bit, there's some extra stuff where, for example, you can read about phase cancellation and decibels, and a lot about psychoacoustics, and like Audio Illusions series on YouTube, which is super cool. So there's really a bunch of stuff in here. And it also covers not just kind of how to not just the basics of sound design, but also more about the interactive part, game audio, which deals with how sounds get into games and how game engines work, middleware, and even a little bit of audio programming. And yeah, as well as then to the more interpersonal stuff, like how do we network, game jams and stuff like that, and how to find mentorships, be creative on demand, all of this stuff. And then lastly, we've got present your job and present your work and get your first job, which deals with how you should design your demo reel, and what should a good demo reel look like, what kind of length does it have, all of these things, and like creating a website, how to write a resume, things like that. So I really recommend checking it out. If you're not sure, again, just start from the beginning. If you already know what you want to get into, then you can use these and filter it out. It also works with keywords, so you can type stuff in if you're looking for a specific thing. We've also got further learning resources, which is just, again, a huge list of really, really cool resources that you can also filter through the categories and topics, as well as communities page, and mentorships. And yeah, this is really, really valuable as well, especially if you're already a little bit on your journey and you can then figure out, okay, I'm serious about this. I really want someone to help me. Let me find a mentor in my specialty area. And this goes beyond just game audio. So this is also really cool. If you've noticed that, okay, games is awesome, but I maybe want to do more post-production stuff, you can also find out more about that here. But yeah, so that's the general gist of the game audio learning website. The next thing I want to talk about is opportunities. So there's really a bunch of different diverse jobs in different areas in this field. And I'll get to this in the next slide, as there's a bunch of them listed. But what I've already said is really just pursue what you enjoy doing. So if you enjoy making sound design is good. If you enjoy designing systems and working with game engines, maybe you want to go into tech, programming, audio programmer, recording sounds that you perform, Foley. There's a whole profession about that. And dialogue editors, super, super underrated. Obviously, composers with making music and planning schedules and enabling people to do their jobs better is, of course, focused around production. So here we have, this is part of the learning roadmap, so I've just taken this out. But basically, here you have a little kind of overview of different in-house jobs at studios, and these are all audio roles. So we have this kind of split into 3 different parts: entry, mid, and senior level. And at an entry level, the job titles usually are called intern or graduate or associate or junior, but they generally mean kind of the same thing. And there's a bunch of different roles, including like sound designer, which deals very much with making sounds, and recording stuff, editing, all of that stuff. Technical sound design is very much working with Wise, Fmod, other middleware, and the game engine to design systems, and then take those assets that the sound designers create and put them into the game, make sure they work, and stuff like that. They also create tools and do a lot of the bug fixing and testing and all of that. So yeah, technical sound design is really a role in itself, especially at bigger studios, which is really, really valuable. And there's there's things that we can kind of that are really really cross. What's the word? There, all of these kind of blend together a little bit. So there's no necessarily hard borders with the responsibilities of each of these disciplines because, like I said, if you're at an indie studio, you're probably doing all of this. But if you're in a AAA, you'll be doing very, very niche stuff. So my job, for example, I also do some of the technical sound design, but I also have a technical sound designer on the team. So we do a lot of our work in collaboration and we plan a lot of the systems together. And I talk to him about, okay, how can we get the sound into the game? I want it to do this. And I tell him my ideas and I explain it a little bit, and he'll then talk me through how we might be able to do that. And then we figure out, okay, how do we need to split up the sounds to be able to make it sound like that? So, for example, if we're creating a footstep system that we want to have playing with different surfaces, we would then get together and say, okay, how can we do this? So the objective is to create footsteps that switch depending on the surface, and we also want to maybe have some sweeteners. So for example, when there's debris or glass, we want to add another layer on top of that to make it a little bit more realistic and more interesting. And then we would talk and he would say, okay, maybe you can do this, that, and the other thing, which would, for example, be we can maybe use the surface materials that the art team has to then switch out the different sound assets. And we would need to cast array and to figure that out and all of these things, which are very, very techy. But he would then go ahead and tell me, okay, so we want to split maybe the footsteps into these different layers and stuff like that, and we would then collaboratively work through that, and I would then create the sounds for it, and he would work on the system, and then we would test it together. I would put the assets in, he would probably test it with placeholder assets, or she or they and then basically we would iterate on it and say, okay, this is working well, but maybe we need more. We need the system to also include the wetness. So if what if it rains? Okay, this is a new challenge. How do we do that? Do we add a layer of wet footsteps, or do we need to record another set for each single kind of surface in wet? So wet dirt, wet gravel, wet wood, all of that stuff. Or do we just have a generic layer that layers on top of that? So these are the kind of questions that we kind of are posed with on a daily basis, and that we have to figure out together to really work within the constraints of the time that we have and the budget and all of that. Then we have the role dialogue editor. So they very much deal with, as the name suggests, the dialogue, and there's at kind of less junior positions. It even goes to what is it called, dialogue designer, and the dialogue designer deals with a bunch of other things, not just dialogue editing, but also recording the sessions, being there with the audio director and the VO director, and basically helping engineer the sessions. So recording with the right microphones, making sure the levels are good. Potentially they even help with the planning and the asset lists and all of that. So that's another whole kind of discipline. You also have audio QA testers. So QA is a huge part of game development, and they're really, really important. They test games, and not only do they test stuff, but they make sure to report all of the bugs and the things that are not working. So they're actively trying to break the game. And through that, they find out what's currently not working, what needs to be fixed, what's wrong, what doesn't work, stuff like that. And so in audio, the tricky thing is that a lot of the QA team often doesn't necessarily have the experience to know what the problem is or what's wrong, and usually we only get, oh, the sound is missing for this or something like that, or this isn't working. And if you have someone with an audio background who's in a specific audio QA role, they can be unbelievably valuable because they obviously know how things should sound, what kind of the things are to look out for. For example, like walking on different surfaces and making sure the footsteps switch. And oh, this is wet. It needs to sound wet. Or it doesn't. Okay, what's wrong here? Let's report that. So by having someone in an audio QA test role who's more specialized, it's really, really helpful. Audio programmers are there to be the medium between the programming or engineering team and the sound team, and they basically help create tools. So, for example, yeah, and also whole systems. So those include reverb systems, for example. So yeah, creating a whole system that manages to make it feel a lot realer by having the the player within the space calculate like what are the different surfaces that are around the player. Are they in a certain room? Are they outside? All of this stuff, and then kind of like adjusting those parameters. They also just build things like batch renaming tools, all of this kind of stuff where they can save lots of time of the audio team. And then composers as well. And why I put very rare is because these are in-house job roles specifically. So you often don't necessarily have in-house composers at junior levels, unless it's maybe like a small indie studio. Usually those composers get outsourced, but they're studios like, for example, CD Projekt Red and stuff that have in-house composers. So the bigger the studio, the more likely that they have in-house composers. Yeah, and then as we go up into the different, into more senior positions, we branch out with even more roles, like, for example, audio producers, which are part of the production team and look after the audio, make sure that the planning is working and everything. So they will also potentially coordinate things like dialogue recording sessions. So they will help book in the actors and stuff like that, along with the audio director and the dialogue designers. We also have Foley artists and Foley editors. Sometimes at big studios, they're part of the studio. For example, I believe Sony Santa Monica has their own Foley studio and Foley artists and editors. And what Foley artists do is they basically perform sounds live, so to speak, and then they record it, and the editors will make sure that it's edited and sounds cool to the picture and also synchronized and everything. So there's a bunch of videos on that. You usually see it in films specifically, but it's used for games as well. And a lot of the time, so for example, in The Quarry, which I worked on, because there were so many different cutscenes, we had help with the Foley from Molyneux, which are a great Foley studio based in London. And so they recorded a bunch of the Foley. And my part of my job was to work closely together with them. And we had huge asset lists. So it was thousands of assets, which of cutscenes basically, and each of those sequences, each of those cutscenes needed assets. So I had to make sure that the Foley studio got each different cutscene, each video basically, or each animation rather. And then I also made sure that the spreadsheet was always up to date, that they had any notes in there, because when you're working on a game, the things that you deliver are often very, very, very work in progress. So, for example, when I send over one of these animations, it might be gray silhouette characters that don't have any props yet. So they might be pretending to shoot the shotgun, but they're not holding anything in their hands. And it's just in a gray box and everything. So I then need to write down, like, what is everyone doing here? What's happening? This character is doing this, and, make sure that then it all gets delivered okay. and then basically coordinate with them. And I developed a really good relationship with some of the awesome people that worked there, and that was part of my job. And so it's really not just about necessarily making sounds, but it's also a lot about organization and figuring out all of these things, communicating with people. Um, then what else have we got? So we have all of the senior and lead roles, of course, but those are probably not as applicable here. But yeah, there's a lot of really cool areas that we can go into, and often with more seniority comes a lot of different paths as well. And yeah, so just to give an overview as well, lead sound designer, principal sound designer usually are the people who are leading the teams, and they help out the juniors as well and mentor them, and just keep the whole team on the same page. They do a lot of the organization as well. And then the audio director has an overview of the entire project and gives the audio direction and all of that. Yeah, so that is pretty much the overview of everything. Now it's really down to questions. I'd love to answer as much as I can. So if anyone has any questions, please shoot ahead, and I'll do my very best. I hope this was useful so far, and yeah. Oh, it's really cool to see also, Nuno, that you're a Foley artist. Also, read this out. Hi, Greg. Greetings from Indonesia. It was a great talk. Really enjoying it. I was curious on your approach when working on an indie and AAA games. Is there any huge difference in approaches on each project? Also, how would you split the roles between creative and technical stuff on those kinds of projects? So yeah, really good question. So the difference between AAA and indie games is usually that you have slightly different timelines. So indie games, depending on their budget and their team, often might have a little bit of a shorter development cycle. So maybe instead of 2 to 3 years, they have 1 year, 1 to 2 years. So, and the team size also is different. So, for example, you might have one sound designer, or two sound designers, or maybe one composer and a sound designer instead of a whole team of people. So, for example, on the Quarry, I believe we were all the audio team who worked on it was, I think, 10 people or something like that, or 11. I'm not even sure, but at peak, I think we were 6 to 8 people working on it, because we had some people coming on and off depending on when it was really busy and stuff. So the approach is kind of like figuring out just from a timeline perspective of what do we have to focus on, because if you're one person working on it and the game still has a lot of content, you'd try to focus on the most important parts if you don't have a big audio team. But generally, honestly, the approaches are reasonably similar in terms of when it comes to your day-to-day tasks, except that you're probably wearing more hats. So a friend of mine who's currently working in indie is doing a lot of different things on a daily basis, where he's also kind of wearing a little bit more hats, versus I'm a little bit more focused on just the sound design and a little bit more systems and stuff like that. But also part of my job is analyzing. So today I played a bunch of games because we're in pre-production at the moment, and that's one of the coolest parts of the job. But I play them without music, for example, and I try to figure out what's this doing if I do this and that, and then I write all of that down and I present it to the team later, and I say, hey, this game is doing this cool thing, but this not so much, and stuff like that. How would you split the roles between creative and technical stuff? So yeah, so the thing is, this is a tricky one. It's if you're not very technical and you're on an indie project and you don't have anyone who's technical, then you'll probably need to work with a programmer, and that might be tricky because programmers often don't necessarily know what the best practices are for implementing audio and how the end results should sound. So the best tip is to develop a good connection with one of the programmers who's going to be responsible for the audio implementation early on, and really try and kind of have a lot of meetings with them. And it's best to talk in person or over call, because when you're writing messages, a lot of the subcontext can be lost, and it can be really, really tricky to get stuff across just in text and how you want things to work. It's also really good to mock stuff up and to kind of show them this is how it should sound in the end. So basically, communication is the main deal. But yeah, the split would just be as if you're one person or two people or whatever, then you need to kind of like I said, work more with programmers. Next question: what kind of VSTs do you have available at the studio? So because we're an outsourcing team and we all work from home, so we all have our own studios. So I, for example, have a computer that's supplied by the company, but generally I use my own plugins. So I have a bunch of stuff that I've accumulated over the years, and if we need anything for the project that's specific, then I can bring that up to my audio director, and I can say, hey, I think this will be a really good tool for us to use. Can we purchase this? So yeah, but what kind of VSTs? There's a huge list of stuff that I used. There's an article that I wrote recently, which I shall try and find. It's on Game Audio Learning, and it is down here, and it's called Essential Tools. And basically, if this doesn't switch to square, come on. Yeah, basically in here, there's wow, my internet is terrible. There's a whole list of plugins that I use, my favorite ones, and yeah, you can find them here. So I'll just post this in the chat. And there's a bunch of free plugins in here as well. Cool, then. Awesome. Thanks for posting these, Jayden. So is it preferred to create sound assets in-house, or can you outsource this task? How does that affect your tasks in your role? Cool. So for assets, it really depends. So for example, if I'm a sound designer, I would create the assets myself, of course. But if there's a bunch of stuff that is tricky to record, like for example, if there's huge amounts of Foley, then that is probably a good idea to outsource to a specific Foley studio, as they'll be more efficient at doing that, and they'll have the tools because they have a whole Foley stage and different props and all of that. And the same goes for example, if you're doing cars or something, recording a car by yourself is really hard, and especially if it's like a Lamborghini or something, which you then have to rent, you have to get someone to drive it, you have to have multiple people to operate the microphones and all of that. So in that case, there's specific vendors like Pole Position Production or Sounding Suite who are really good at doing these kinds of specific tasks. And so in that case, an outsourcing studio might be helpful. So generally, we are outsourcers ourselves, of course, but we work really, really closely with our clients. So a lot of the time we are integrated into the team as their sound department. So for example, on The Quarry, we were literally the audio team for that game. And yeah, but we then worked with an outsourcer to help us do the Foley. Which disciplines do you think overlap more with audio design than others within game development and production? That's an interesting one. So I think design is huge, because design, they obviously kind of are responsible for new features and for all of the different, for example, if it's a shooter, like how does the gun work? Is this does it have automatic fire? Does it have single fire? Does it have burst fire? And these kinds of things then have to be considered as an audio person, because we have to then make sure that is that also works with the soundscape. And so if they choose, we're if it's a MOBA or something like that, and they say, oh, we're adding a new ability to each champion, so then we have to again make sure that audio has it. So I think design is huge. Art as well is really important because we ideally want to really be, for lack of a better term, married to the art in terms of the sound and the art should really blend together to create an immersive world that is believable. And so it's really important for us to work closely with the art team. So at the moment, we're in pre-production on the project I'm working on, and I am in one of the channels for the concept art. So I get a lot of concept art, and I can look at that concept art and I can say, okay, cool, we're going in this direction. And so I can use that as an influence, as you would when you design sounds in your free time, and you can take some art and you make some cool soundscapes to it or some visuals. And so obviously working with visuals is really, really important. Production is also hugely important because we do a lot in tandem with planning and stuff. But I think design and art are the big ones. Programming is important as well, of course, because we have to do a lot of get code support for certain features. But I think really the closest work together is of discipline overlap is kind of like design and art. I hope that was the right question, because I guess overlap it might have been slightly phrased. I think I might have read it the wrong way potentially, but I hope that answers the question. Oh yeah, so yeah, sorry, Katie. So I will answer. So Greg, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Not sure if you touched on it at the start, but how did you get into sound design, and what soft skills do you think are good to cultivate for people wanting to get into it? Yes, absolutely. So I got into sound design through music. I have a background in music, and I studied music production at the Academy of Contemporary Music, ACM, in Guildford. And I think one of the big things that kind of got me into sound design was the fact that I thought it was really, really hard to make music to briefs, and I always enjoyed making the sounds for tracks a lot. So I kind of realized like, oh, what? There's like a whole career in this, and I love games, of course, and I'm a big gamer myself. So that kind of then helped me transition, and yeah, and basically it really went from there. I taught myself a bunch of the basics by looking at different um, entry level jobs, and I tried to figure out what do I need to know, and then I wrote all of that stuff down, what I needed to know for like a junior level sound design position. And then I started to break that down into smaller tasks and kind of learn each of them. And soft skills wise, I think hugely important is communication. It's totally vital. We are such cross-disciplinary workers in game audio. We have to, like I said, work closely with all the other teams, and also with our other fellow co-workers in sound. So I work closely with my lead and my tech sound designer and my audio director, and I get a bunch of feedback. So this morning, for example, I had to deliver some sound for a cutscene, and I got some feedback, and then I iterated on it, and then I got some more feedback, and then it was approved, and then it was sent. But like being able to kind of take on feedback and be open to then making changes based on what kind of feedback you receive is super important. So kind of just I think being receptive to feedback is really, really important as well. And I think in this industry, getting into it is the big key is networking. And I know that people hate to hear that word, but networking really is mainly just going to different places and making friends. And the places where you find people in the industry are usually at industry events or local events and stuff like that. There's a really cool event calendar on soundeffect.com. I'll try to find it and link it later, which has a bunch of game audio events and conferences and stuff like that, which are super useful. And if you go to one of these events, like just talk to people. This community is super, super friendly and really, really amazing. I've also already said like the mentorship page, places like this are great as well, of course, like the Into Games Discord and stuff like that. So and it's really useful to just like make friends with anyone in the industry, whether it's in audio or in art or production, because a lot of the time how you end up finding a job is that someone um, says, oh, we are looking for someone and I know this cool person. I've they're really good at what they do, and they're junior. We're looking for an entry level position. I already know that they'd be good to work with, and I've seen their reel and stuff like that. And so yeah, then basically, um, they get invited to do an audio test or an interview and stuff like that. So like make friends and also make audio friends because sound designers hire other sound designers. So like being a cool person to work with and be around with is super important. So just like be your best self and be someone who people enjoy spending time with and around, because work culture at the end of the day is super important, and we really at Soundcuts especially really value that. If like we really value, I think, like culture and team over skills, because we can train people up, we can teach them, but it's hard to work with someone that you just do not get along with on a daily basis, and it just creates a crappy atmosphere. So yeah, it's just really important to be kind and friendly and fun. And yeah, I really also have to say, like, my first full-time gig I got I got in the pub. I got offered the job in the pub. So you never know where opportunity is going to strike. So just like be prepared for it. And yeah, I think that covers most of it. There's a YouTube video I did as well on how I got into the industry, which I can link in here later as well, if someone reminds me. And yeah, that kind of sums up the whole thing. Cool. Then next question. Really helpful stuff. Thank you. Do you have any advice for students looking for internships? They often aren't advertised. So any tips from your experience would be great. Yeah. So internships is a tricky one. We have not that many internships, unfortunately, I think, in this industry yet. The best practice is probably just to try and ask around and make tweets on Twitter. So I also want to say, unfortunately, maybe unfortunately to some, but like Twitter and LinkedIn, but especially Twitter is like really the place to be for game audio. There's tons of jobs that are advertised there and stuff like that. But also Airwiggles, which is our little social platform, which I can quickly show here. So yeah, it's similar to Twitter, and you can just like post stuff. We have different categories, and there's like things like events and stuff here, and we have all the upcoming audio events posted here and what they are. There's a talk advertised in here, and things like reel reviews. So definitely keep an eye on that. There's also people posting sound design reels in here, and people giving advice, which is like really, really cool. So definitely check that out. Yeah, the internships, keep an eye out, post on Twitter, and then if you kind of yeah, if you message me also, like, I'm super happy to repost these things, and people are generally really, really helpful when someone puts out like a question like that on LinkedIn. I had someone ask recently for mentorship. I reposted that, and I think someone else said that there's like 2 opportunities at, I think, EA or something starting soon. So yeah, sometimes that can be good. Cool. Next question. What are the most popular DAWs? Yes, Reaper for sure. I think the most popular ones are Pro Tools, Nuendo, and Reaper. I would personally recommend Reaper. You can use it for free up until you kind of, I would say personally, up until you make money with it, and then you should really pay for license. But it has a 60-day free evaluation period, and after that, you can kind of still use it. But yeah, I would personally say it's the strongest DAW with how good it is for games and the workflow, because it's super customizable, and yeah, really good. Nuno Bento, thank you so much for the talk. I've just quit my position working full-time as Foley artist and sound designer for film. After 7 years, I want to pursue the lifelong dream of working in games. Oh, that's awesome. It seems to be that the skills I acquired working in film are great, but I'm feeling overwhelmed by the difference in workflows. Do you have any tips regarding organization of assets, naming conventions, communication, and words commonly used in game audio pretty much exclusively? Yeah, so there's a section actually, I think, on this in the learning roadmap. So I definitely recommend checking out that. Also, if you want to chat further about this, if you message me after this, I'm happy to talk about it. But general tips will be to kind of first focus on where you want to go within games. So if you want to go into sound design, I would then kind of focus on that more. That will then make it a little bit less overwhelming because you're focusing on a specific area, and then you can figure out, okay, do I need to learn how much of game engines or middleware do I need to learn for this specific position that I want to go into? And yeah, so organization of assets. Yeah, we use a lot of asset lists and stuff like that. It's a little bit much to go into for now, for the little time we have. So like I said, just message me afterwards, and I'm happy to chat. Which are the industry standard sound design plugins? Yeah, the artists, the article that I mentioned above are a lot of the industry standard ones. Crota sound design plugins. Yeah, Crota stuff is cool. The weaponizer especially is nice. So yeah. Favorite VSTs. Yeah, so again, there's, I think from my favorite ones, Portal by Output is super cool. I love Uberloud by Boom. OTT, which is by Xfer. All the Valhalla stuff is awesome. Sound Toys stuff is amazing. But it's, at the end of the day, it's very much like putting those things together into different chains and then messing around with it and experimenting. So all of that. What are non-audio skills or traits that you think have led to your success in the industry? What are non-audio hurdles to you see preventing people from gaining traction in their career? Yeah, so I mentioned a bunch of the non-audio skills already. The hurdles, that's an interesting one. Yeah, so I think regarding hurdles, I think one of the big things is that this industry is there's a bunch of positions and a bunch of different jobs, but there's also a lot of people applying for them, especially at an entry position. So I think the big hurdle is to be able to stand out and make sure that you have a really solid demo reel. So basically, the demo reel is what will get you the job, along with, you know, the person you are. So if you're cool to work with and you have amazing demo reel, so the skills, the demo reel is like, here is my proof that I am good at sound design. And so the demo reel is really important. You can join our reel reviews. I would recommend that to anyone who's looking to start making their own reel, because we review all kinds of reels. They're uploaded on YouTube as well, so you can watch them after. You can submit your own reels, and there's another. It's also called. We've got Reel Talk by Power Up Audio, which is yeah, Kevin, I think Rigame does that, and he is amazing as well. He does that on Twitch live. I think you can watch them afterwards as well. I also recommend checking that out because you will really learn loads from just watching other people's reels. And you'll get a kind of feel for what the quality bar is like. But yeah, I just want to say as well, if you're starting out, that will be super daunting, and you'll see other people's work. You'll be like, oh my God, I'll never get there. But trust me, you will. It's like practice and practice and practice, because it took me a long time of a lot of practice to get anywhere near. And then now I have to say, like, the quality of juniors has risen so much. Like the reels I look at now are like 10 times better than my reel from back in the day. So yeah, but again, like don't be like overwhelmed. You'll definitely get there. Just one step at a time. Yes, fantastic. Great blog piece. Thank you for posting that, Adele. That stuff is super, super important. I think that I might have even, did I link to that in the learning roadmap? I'm not sure. I think there's something about introverts that I linked, but yeah. What are you likely to experience in a audio test for a job? So that is a really, really interesting question. And on the learning roadmap, we have a whole thing dedicated to that, which is somewhere here, application, interview, and audio test. So this whole chapter is an overview, and it gives you a big kind of all-round overview of what it might look like, of what generally it looks like. So you have kind of your application, which is the first round, and yeah, you can kind of things to look out for. We've then got our interviews. We have a lot of stuff in here, like how to prepare, what you should do before the interview, what you should do during the interview, and different topics, and also questions that they might ask you. So you can prepare with these questions. Good tip is also to do a little bit of interview trial and practice with your friends, because when you're in the hot seat, that's tricky. So prepare for it by literally saying like, hey, can you help me run through these questions? And yeah, I that's something I would love to do in the future, to do some host some mock interview practices, because that stuff is super useful. And then you get the audio test, and there's a bunch of stuff on here, what you kind of experience. But yeah, generally you have an actual audio test where you have to create some sounds for linear sequence, like a gameplay sequence, and then you have to do a write-up, oftentimes on how you would implement the things, what your kind of techniques were, how you made the sound, stuff like that. And then sometimes there's also an interactive audio test, especially if you're going for a technical position. So this might be like a mock-up of a gun system, for example, in Wise. So they'll give you all the assets, and they'll say, hey, you have to implement all of this stuff in this way, and we want single fire, automatic fire, we want it to change based on distance, stuff like that. Would you recommend learning coding languages for work in this field? If so, any specific languages? So, I think it depends on the position you're trying to get into. I think it's really useful to have a general overview of how programming works. So the very, very basics, like what are variables, what are integers, what are booleans, stuff like that, and how does that what does that to do with audio? Like, what kind of context can we use this in? And so an example would be, I have a character, the health bar goes below 50%, and we want to then slowly bring in a heartbeat depending on how low it is. So the number here, or we call that like a variable, and the number specifically will be an integer. So then kind of based on that knowledge, we can do things with it. So I would say, if you're just doing sound design stuff, learn the basics, like the very, very basics. And that is, again, I think in the game audio basic stuff under here. And if you're going into technical sound design, I think a little bit more knowledge will be good. For sure, the basics of like C# and stuff, if you're working in Unity especially, or if you're wanting to work in Unreal, then there's blueprints, which are useful. And then if you're going into audio programming, it's an absolute must. So then it's for sure programming. Regarding languages, if you're working in Unity, which is generally more indie, but I'm kind of wary of saying that now, because a lot of AAA companies also use Unity. But yeah, that will be C#. Otherwise, C++, But I think learning a little bit of C#, like the basics, and then maybe a little bit of blueprint scripting would be useful. But again, it depends where you want to go. So yeah, if you're enjoying like doing the what's it called? If you enjoy doing programming, then definitely follow that. Like audio programmer is one of the most what's the word? Seeked kind of jobs in this industry. Like we do not have enough audio programmers. We have a lot of programmers that don't want to do audio and get roped into doing audio, but there's not enough programmers with an audio background and a serious knowledge of audio who are also really good programmers. So they're really like what are they called? Unicorns is what we refer to them. So if you're into programming and want to get into audio programming, that is definitely a good career path to go down to. But if you're not into it, then I would not really suggest going into it because you'll not be making sounds. You'll be doing programming. So if you want to be a sound designer and then you're focused on just learning programming to become an audio programmer, you'll probably not have a great time. Awesome. So I think we've hit our time limit now, 5 o'clock. Unless there are any more questions. Yeah,
there may be. I think there might be one more, which is if we can do it quickly. It's just Fmod or WWise.
yes, classic. So that is again a wonderfully unfair answer of it depends. If you're looking to get into AAA, 100% wise. If you want to go into indie, Fmod is used more in indie, but they do very similar things in a slightly different workflow. So whichever one you pick up, you'll be able to transfer those skills onto the other. So I would say it doesn't matter that much. Pick one up or the other, and then just focus on learning like how they work on a higher level, and then dig into like the more detailed stuff. Because it's like a DAW. It's like Reaper or Ableton or FL Studio or Pro Tools. They all basically do the same thing in different ways with different features. But yeah, I personally use Wise. I've only used Fmod on one project. I've used Wise in the past 3 or 4. So yeah, I personally am a Wise user. I would recommend people to learn Wise. But yeah, cool. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute blast. I had a great time. Hope that was useful as well for people. And thanks for the great questions.
Yeah, it was super interesting. Thanks a lot for coming along. As someone who knows absolutely nothing about audio design or just audio in general, I find it super interesting. So I'm sure those of us who do know more than I do got a lot from it. And everyone who's still hanging around, still listening, be sure to subscribe to Greg's YouTube channel, which is Game Audio Analysis. I'll put another link in chat for that. And absolutely check out the Game Audio Learning Portal as well. So much unbelievable work has gone into making that, and it really is fantastic. So give it a look. And thanks a lot for coming, everyone. And I don't know if you have anything last you wanna plug or.
Oh, I'm super humbled by your fantastic plug there. I really appreciate it. Thank you, and Katie and everyone else from Into Games for not only hosting this but also for your amazing work. You're doing so much good stuff for the community, and yeah, just really appreciate it. It's awesome. So yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for having me again. It was real fun. So yeah, have a wonderful day, everyone.
Yes, you too, everyone. Enjoy your evenings, and we'll see you again very, very soon. Goodbye.
Awesome. Bye-bye. Take care.